Good afternoon. Welcome to our program. I'm Jeff Johnston. I'm a partner in the litigation group in the Houston office, although today I'm coming to you from our beautifully remodeled offices in Washington, D.C. Okay, let's get started. As I said, my name is Jeff Johnston. I lead B&E's cybersecurity and data privacy team. I spend a significant amount of my time advising clients on incident response when there is a breach. I also talk to clients about assessing the maturity of their cybersecurity, and I also talk to boards and to audit committees and risk committees about these very same issues. And everything I hear and read, and I assume everything you hear and read, is that directors and officers need to be laser focused on cybersecurity. But most of that stuff doesn't tell you what that means. What are you supposed to be doing? And when you talk to your IT team and you say, hey, bring me up to speed on our cybersecurity, are we doing what we need to do? They say, yeah. And they say cybersecurity is solid. And you, as an executive, don't really have the ability to cut through the techno babble and figure out where we need to be without bringing in a team of consultants. And that means when you talk to your board and the board says, are we where we need to be? You don't have any ability, they don't have any ability to test you either without bringing in a ton of consultants. So the point I want to get across today, I want to spend some time on is you don't have to be a techie to understand cybersecurity and understand if your company is moving in the right direction. You can cut through the technical jargon and look at the building blocks of cybersecurity program without being hyper-technical. And when you do that, you'll either see, look, I think our team has its act together, or you'll know you need to go to your board and lobby for more resources. So let's jump in. The agenda for today, we're going to start with why is this important. I think we all know why it's important, but I want to spend some time on that. Then I'm going to jump into sort of the common attack vectors and the way that you should be protecting against those attack vectors. Then I want to spend some time going through a mock ransomware and show you how the event happens and then how the negotiation with the bad guys happen and how the resolution happens there. And then we'll spend some time at the end talking about what are the building blocks that you as a non-technical executive should be looking for to make sure that your team has cybersecurity where it needs to be. So let's jump in. Why is it important? Well, because when you get attacked, it's really that, right? It can result in, if it takes your network down, you may be lost revenue. Costs associated with remediation and incident response consultants you've got to bring in to deal with an incident are expensive. It can be IP loss, data loss. And if it gets public, it could damage your reputation. And so this is why you should be doing everything you can to prevent these attacks from happening. And the other thing that's really scary in this area is that the bad guys only have to get it right once. Your defense has to get it right 100% of the time because it only takes one incident for these bad things to happen. And the other sort of scary part of this is you can have all of the consultants and all of the tools on your network, but the reality is your weakest link are your end users. One person sitting in the payroll department who clicks on a link they shouldn't click on, and all of these bad things can happen. And so it's just really hard to have the defenses in place to prevent these things from happening. Another reason why we care about this and why this is important is because a variety of government agencies are now telling us that we have to take this seriously. There are regulations out there requiring certain levels of cybersecurity and certain levels of disclosure on that cybersecurity. I'm going to use the SEC as an example, but there are a variety of other government agencies that are focused on this. But the SEC issued some new rules last year requiring disclosures on cybersecurity. So in the first instance, if you have a material incident, come back to what that means, you have to disclose it within 4 business days on Form 8K. Item 105, Form 8K. You have to say what happened, when it happened, and you have to say how it's impacted your company. And then if after that 8K, if it gets worse, you got to file another 8K. These are obviously not disclosures you want to make, and that's one reason why you should be focused on security and preventing these things from happening. Another part of the SEC rules go to what's in the 10K in particular, a new item 1C. First, you got to talk about your risk management and your strategy. What are you doing to assess the risks, to identify those risks, and manage those risks? And you have to say whether those cybersecurity risks have impacted you in the past. So if you've had a material cybersecurity incident in the past, you're going to have to talk about that in your 10K. Now, you don't have to give a lot of details, but you can't describe these risks as hypothetical when they've actually happened to you. And the SEC has actually had a couple of enforcement actions penalizing companies for not being more forthcoming about the fact that they've had cyber incidents. And they also want to know, the SEC wants to know whether you're using consultants to assess this. And so, since you have to disclose these things, obviously you have to be doing these things, and that means you need to be focused on this. And then also in the 10K, you have to talk about the board and management's role in cybersecurity governance. The SEC and the shareholders want to know that you're not just taking care of this down at a departmental level, but at the highest levels of the company are focused on cybersecurity and managing those risks. I'll also note that the proxy advisory firms, and in particular ISS, have now started assessing these cybersecurity disclosures as part of their corporate governance scores. And so, your shareholders are going to be bombarded with whether you're doing what you need to be doing from a cybersecurity perspective. So I said that this is all focused around materiality. The rules don't really tell you what materiality means. They refer back to the basic case law, Basic versus Levinson, TSC versus Northway, which cite at a very high level that it's material if it's a substantial likelihood that the shareholder would think it's important. That's not a great standard. Or if it would significantly alter the total mix of information made available. Again, that's not a very specific standard. In the rules, though, they give some examples, and I think those examples are really helpful in determining what is not material. So what the examples talk about is the impact on the company's financial condition. Now, it's not just the dollars and cents. There are subjective elements as well, but you do have to understand dollars and cents. Did your company get shut down for a month, or did you get shut down for 10 minutes? That's going to be those are different standards. Is there any harm to your reputation? Is the fact that you've been hit by this event going to either cause you to lose existing customers or not be able to win new business in a way that would materially impact the results? Is there going to be litigation or investigations that are going to be expensive? And then what's the cost of recovering? And have you lost any sort of key IP that's going to impact your ability to operate going forward? That's what you think about when you're thinking about, is it material and do we need to disclose it? I think in my mind, for most public companies, that's a pretty high bar. We have, in the last year, counseled a couple clients who've had incidents about whether they needed to make a disclosure. And it was always a very easy decision that no, even though this was not a great event, it's not material to the company. All right, so now let's talk about the sort of attack vectors that you see out there and some of the key defenses you should be putting in place to prevent against those. And I got a question here. I want to take this. How frequently and to what extent would you recommend discussing cybersecurity with the board or the audit committee? I think at the audit committee level, it's probably a quarterly discussion. And I think you need to have, whoever is in charge of security, whether that's a CISO or a director of security, needs to have access to the audit committee so there can be a direct communication. I also think that the audit committee should report to the board probably on an annual basis on this. And to the extent there's any testing or consulting work done, the audit committee needs to know that we did pen testing or we did a tabletop and here are the results so that they know that the company is staying up on it. And the other point that this question sort of brings to mind for public companies is the disclosure committee. If you have a disclosure committee, security's got to be a part of that disclosure committee. Because one thing that you do sometimes see is that the security team is fully on top of cybersecurity, but they're not communicating with the disclosure committee. And so the folks who need to make disclosure decisions don't know what's happening on the security side. That line of communication needs to be open. Okay, so let's jump into these attack vectors here. What do the bad guys want? Well, the first instance, the bad guys want counter. They want access to your network. The easiest way to get access to your network is not breaking in. It's not some sort of intricate hack over the web, but it is just getting somebody's credentials and typing them in. And so how do they do that? The primary way they get it is through phishing. There's other ways, but we know that in roughly half of all data breaches, they've stolen user credentials. They do that through phishing, and I'll come back to that. Historically, they've done it through credential stuffing, which is you've got a personal account, you've got an Amazon account, and those credentials get compromised. And somebody posts the Amazon credentials on the dark web. Well, if you use those same credentials for your corporate login, they take those Amazon credentials, try them on the corporate network, and if they work, then they're in. So you shouldn't be reusing credentials. Brute force is when they just sort of sit up and put a computer against your network and it just runs millions and millions and millions of permutations of letters and numbers to see if they can guess it. Good systems will lock out after 10, and so that shouldn't be able to happen. And then keyloggers, when they put malware on your system, they just copy down your keystrokes and they can get your credentials that way. How do we protect user accounts? Well, I mean, this is sort of old news here, but long, complex, unique passwords, unique. Every account should have separate login credentials. Work and login, work and personal needs to be kept separate. Ideally, you would have a unique password for every single account you had. You would not reuse any of your stuff anywhere. That's hard to do, right? How do you do that? Use a password manager. Let the password manager handle that for you. The other thing you can do, I talked about when you have someone, an account gets compromised and those details get published on the web. How do you know that? There's a website here, Have I Been Pwned? You can put your email address in there and it will email and tell you if your accounts have been compromised, and you'll know to go in and change your accounts at that point. Every network, this next point, this is a no-brainer. Every network needs to have multi-factor authentication everywhere. If you have that, that means if the credentials get accessed, the bad guys still can't get in. When we talk about protecting accounts, what accounts do the bad guys want? They don't want the normal user accounts. They want the administrator credentials. And so you have to put as much security around those as possible. Administrators should only use those credentials when they're doing administrative things. Shouldn't have access to the web or email when they're using that. And ideally, you would have a separate credentials manager that they have to go check those administrative credentials out and then check them back in when they're done. And then those credentials get deleted. And the next time they need them, they get a brand new set of credentials. That way, if those credentials get compromised, they're only accessible for a very short period of time. And then watch out for phishing attacks, and we'll jump into that now. So we've all seen these phishing attacks. Something comes in purporting to be from someone you trust, asking you to enter some details here. So here, you're being informed, and we redacted the names here to protect the innocent, but this came from a corporate IT, or purported to come from a corporate IT department. And it said, hey, you're about to lose access to your account. Please continue on, click in here, enter your old credentials, and we'll give you new credentials. And if you don't do it within 48 hours, you're going to be locked out. That's the kind of thing that causes a normal employee to panic a little bit. And because they're panicking, they're not going to scrutinize this email. And that's how social engineering works. Or that's how phishing works, is through social engineering, and how using psychology to get what they want. So a false sense of security, make it look like it comes from a trusted source. How do they do that? They spoof or they impersonate, either by faking the email address or going and buying a very similar domain. And just to use an example, if they want to look like they're coming from Exxon, they can go buy exx0n.com. Now that shouldn't be available. Exxon probably owns that, but you can buy the domain that looks very similar, and that's how you can trick people into thinking it's coming from the company. Social engineering also works because a lot of times we're just not fully focused on the task. We're multitasking and not giving that email in front of us our full attention. And when you mix that with a sense of urgency, something that makes them panic, they're just more likely to fall for it. So how do we protect against that? Well, training. Training is key in this area. Employees need to know they got to be skeptical. They have to scrutinize these sorts of things. And they have to be aware of things that are attempting to play on their emotion or create a sense of urgency. We do phishing testing at the firm, and the most failed phishing test we ever did was one that told employees that an HR complaint had been filed against them. And that's just the kind of thing that makes people panic and scares them. And so everybody was clicking on that. And that's the kind of social engineering that these bad guys use. I also am a big fan of a phish reporter. And Microsoft Outlook has this. You can buy third-party tools to do this. But in the body of the email itself, when you've got the email pulled up, you can have a button in the top right that says report as phishing. And they can click that. It goes off to the security team, and the security team can look at it and say, yeah, that's a phish. Good job. And so that's a great point, because if people are tracking things and monitoring things, they're going to be more aware. And there's sort of a debate. I was at a conference last month, debate about when you have this phish testing, do you reward folks catching things, or do you penalize them for clicking on things they shouldn't click on it. And I think there's probably a mix of both, but I'm a bigger fan of the carrots rather than the sticks. When you have this ability to report phishing, put out a list every month of your top fish reporters and praise them for doing it and give them $100 gift card to the top 10 or the top 5. That's the kind of thing that people like and will increase your security. The last point here is one of the soft keys to good cybersecurity is good IT staff or a good information security staff. And by good, I don't just mean smart. I don't just mean competent. I mean approachable. I mean accessible. People need to know who they are and that they can call them and say, hey, I might have screwed up. Can you look at this? And no one's going to judge them and no one's going to yell at them, because if they feel judged or they feel like they're going to get yelled at, they're not going to pick up the phone and call. And you want them to pick up the phone and call, because if they just clicked on something they shouldn't have, we need to fix that now. So what happens next if they get those credentials? Well, they're looking for ways to get financial gain, right? And one that we see a lot, business email compromises. So they get into the network and they don't do anything. They're in somebody's email box and they try and find the finance and accounting folks, and they just sit there. And oftentimes they put in searches that will run periodically and tell them they're not even watching. They're just getting search reports. And they look for invoice and they look for ACH and they look for wire transfer. And that's when they get excited. When they see that there's a financial transaction going on via email, they hijack that transaction. They either put rules in place in that person's email box to where that conversation is the second it hits the inbox is folded away in a folder that you, the user, don't know exists. So that way the user is sitting in front of their computer is not seeing this conversation. It's all happening within a folder. Or, again, the Exxon with the 0 in the domain, they go create a copycat domain and take the conversation to that domain. So the person they're talking to thinks they're talking to the company, but no, it's actually a typo changed domain. And what they do is they look again for the financial transactions and they'll say, we need to send you a new invoice. We've changed our bank account. Our account's under audit. We have to use another account. We've changed our wire instructions. And if you're not on the lookout for that, that's how you lose large amounts of money. And if you don't realize this has happened immediately, after about 24, 48 hours, you lose the ability to have the FBI or the Treasury Department stop that wire transaction. And so this is the kind of thing where you just got to be really, really, anybody who's touching payments needs to be on hyper alert for these kinds of things. So how do you protect against it? They don't get phished, right? But that's kind of easier said than done. Be wary of, particularly finance people, be wary of unusual things happening on their computer. So sometimes I talked about those rules they put in place. That email might flash in the inbox for a second and then disappear. If they're seeing things like that happen, they need to call the security team. Anything where somebody asks you to change payment details, just sirens should be going off everywhere that it's fraud until you convince yourself that it's not. And how do you confirm that it's not fraud? You step away from that email because there's nothing in that email that's going to help you do it. You find a way to contact that person using none of the information in the email. You've got a contact that you had for them before. You've got a switchboard number that you can call the switchboard and ask for them. You have to assume that everything in that email is fake and goes to a bad guy. And so if you just respond, hey, just want to confirm these are the right wire instructions, the bad guy's going to say yes. If you call the phone number in the signature block, the bad guy has had that routed to them and they're going to say yes. So you have to find a way independently of confirming that detail. And in particular, this is an area where we talk about social engineering, where they try and impose a sense of urgency on it so that you're not having time to think. And so if somebody's asking you to pay something outside the usual process, be wary about that. And then the last point I'll make here, there are tools that will look for impersonated domains, in particular people impersonating your senior executives. And so you can have a filter on your system where somebody's pretending to be one of your CFO, for example, and approving payment. Those tools will stop and say, no, this is someone imposed them, an imposter. Another vector that we've seen more recently, this is really, really old school technology here, but watering hole attacks, where the bad guys just put infected documents out on the internet, and then they use search engine optimization to bring their website up to the top of a Google search. And so if you go out searching for a particular type of document, as to use an example, and you click on it, it's usually a PDF or a zip file, there's malware in there. When you click on it, that malware loads onto your system. And they're not targeting you particular, they're just waiting for someone to walk by and do that. And this is an example on the right that we found where someone looking for a very esoteric type of real estate document found it, and it turns out there was malware in it. And this was a good story. Our anti-malware system immediately blocked it. Alerts went out, and we knew the second it happened that it happened. But there are sort of 0-day type attacks where your anti-malware system hasn't seen this before and doesn't know to stop it, and that's how you can get victimized here. So stick to trusted websites. Really, ideally, you wouldn't download things from the internet. Antivirus and anti-malware are your first line of defense here. And then there are also tools out there, browser protection tools, that will block you from going to known malicious websites. And there are also tools out there where you can say, I don't want any of my users going to new websites. A lot of times, these malicious websites have been put online within the last 30 days. And so you can say, no one's allowed to go to websites that haven't been in existence longer than 30 days. And then from the security side, your security team needs to be monitoring the network activity and looking for unusual things, looking for, because when that malware gets unloaded, the first thing it does is it pings out to the bad guy and saying, I'm here. And your tech team can look for those outbound pings and say, hey, why are we talking to that IP address? So all of these sort of things fall into the category of malware, and there are a variety of malware attacks. And we talked about phishing, browsing the web. The classic cases where someone scatters a bunch of infected USB drives in a full parking lot, hopes that someone picks it up and plugs it into their computer, and the malware unloads that way. That still happens. And in fact, I was in a parking lot over the weekend and actually saw a thumb drive in the parking lot and had to stop myself from picking it up. But more modern way of doing that is through the QR code that you see everywhere. They embed you're at a conference, you want to get the agenda from the QR code, and the bad guys have put malicious QR codes in there that infect with malware. So just be real careful about using QR codes. So protect against malware, don't click on things, don't open things, right? That's easier said than done. From a technology side, your network needs to have a concept of least privilege, and that is, everyone has the lowest privileges they need and nothing more. And so admin privileges are very, very rare. And in fact, what they call local admin, and the ability to download and execute a file on your local drive, you should take that away from users as well, and actually get to the point where you're sort of whitelisting approved software so that they can't load anything that hasn't previously been approved, because there are tools out there that are malicious that can be loaded onto a PC without local admin, and you want to block that as well. And keep your antivirus and your software up to date so that if there is a 0-day out there, you're getting on top of that as soon as you can. The other thing that we see that scares the heck out of me and should scare the heck out of you is ransomware. And ransomware is where it's just another attack vector where the bad guy has gotten access to your network, however they've gotten in, but typically through phishing. They've got those credentials, and they do two things. One, they extract data from your network. So they start taking out significant portions of what they think is sensitive data so that they've got your data. And the next thing they do is they then encrypt your network and lock it down. And then they come to you and say, we have your data, we lock down your network. If you want us to give you back your data and not make it public, and you want us to unlock your network, you gotta pay us a ransom. And those numbers are big. And that's why this thing is so scary, because obviously having your data leaked to the public is embarrassing and can be harmful from a corporate basis. But having your network locked down means you're not doing business. And that's obviously very detrimental. So how do we protect against ransomware? Well, there are software out there that protect against this exact thing. They do it in a variety of different ways. There's some that look for the unusual extraction. Are we extracting more data than we would normally see going out of our network? And they flag that. There's also a tool that I've seen that looks for that encryption activity. It looks for mass or bulk encryption. And when it sees mass or bulk encryption on a particular machine, it just disconnects that machine immediately from the network. Because what the bad guys are going to do is they're going to go from machine to machine to machine to machine. And if you can stop it on that very first machine and disconnect that very first machine, you block that ransomware in its tracks. Now you may have lost that one machine, but that's much better than losing a server or losing the entire network. The other thing you need here are immutable backups, and immutable backups that are not that are air gapped from your network. So they're not on your network except for when they're actually backing up. And so when the bad guys come in and they start encrypting things, they don't see your backup. But if they do see your backup, it's immutable. That is, it can't be changed. And so even if they got to your backups, they couldn't encrypt your backup or otherwise do anything with it. And if you have those, you don't have to pay the ransom, because even if they lock down your network, you can say, we don't need your decryption keys. We can restore the backup. All right, so I wanted to go through an example here, and this is sort of pulled together from a variety of things I've seen over the last couple of years. Names have been removed to protect the innocent here, but this largely happened, and you'll see how it sort of played out and how it was resolved. And then we'll talk on the other side of this about all the things you should be thinking about to make sure this doesn't happen to you. All right, so company employee falls for a phishing scam and gives a bad guy their login credentials. That bad guy doesn't do anything immediately with those credentials. They post them on the dark web for sale. Bad guy number 2 comes along, buys those credentials, finds an old VPN that the company had in Spain, that while the company had MFA, didn't have it everywhere, and they didn't have it on this VPN. And as an aside, legacy equipment that you no longer need that's connected to the internet is something you ought to be on the lookout for. Getting rid of as much of that as possible. We want things that are facing the internet to be locked down as tightly as possible. So now the bad guy's in. In this instance, the bad guy is affiliated with the Russian government. The bad guy explores the network, goes from account to account to account, and finds an old administrator account. Shouldn't have old accounts on your network, but old administrator account, 22 years old, and now they've got administrator privileges. They start staging files for extraction, not extracting yet, but just collecting them together. And this is where you got a couple of gold stars here on the company's side here. The company's defenses see this staging, and the alarms go off, and the information security team is alerted, and they see, hey, we've got an incident going on. They call over to B&E and get us involved. They call their incident response consultant. They had an incident response consultant on retainer who they could call immediately and get their attention. And so they invoke that. They also notify their cyber insurance carrier. And we'll talk more about why I think cyber insurance is a really great thing towards the end here. And they get the resources they need to address this attack. The consultant comes in, and this is a consultant that's a brand name consultant, takes over the fence and reports, we've isolated it, we've removed them from your network, and we think we've got them out. And that's where we say famous last words. Because the consultant was wrong. The bad guy got back in, and this time they were bad. So this time they come in through a server in Canada. They get into Active Directory, which is a Microsoft tool that essentially controls the security environment, controls privileges, and controls credentials. And that's not something you want bad guys having access to. They extract 75,000 files, including the legal department drive, customer files that has bid information and pricing information, HR data, and payroll data, all in total 75 gigs. And as an aside, I talked about you don't want to have legacy systems on your network. You don't want to have legacy credentials on your network. You also should be really thoughtful about how long you're going to keep old data. Because if you just never take data off your network, you're going to have payroll and HR data going back decades that if a bad guy gets, you're going to have, and as breached, you're going to have notification obligations under state law. And the more people involved in that, the more people you have to send notifications to. So that's the kind of data you should be actively trying to get off your network. Put it on a hard drive, put it in a drawer. That way, if you need it, you still have it, but the bad guy can't get access to it. Okay, so after they extracted the data, then they got back in, this time through the US servers, because all of the hunting they had done in the network, they found a way to get in through the main US server. They immediately encrypt 6 key servers, a ransom note up that has a screenshot of the file directory of the files that they've extracted, and they demand a payment of 1.625 million, which is an unusually specific number. The insurance carrier, which has been cooperating all this time, has put in place the team to defend against this. So a new incident response consultant, because the first one was wrong when they said they'd gotten the bad guys out. A data recovery consultant to help cover from backup, and then a ransom negotiator, because that's sort of a unique skill, and you want somebody whose only job day in and day out is talking to these bad guys, and so they know who are the good faith bad guys, that is, who will keep their word when you pay them, and who are the bad faith bad guys who are going to take your money and then immediately come back in and ransom you again. You need that intelligence, and you need somebody who understands the pace and the tone of a ransom negotiation. The bad guy at this point has made themselves known. They are a group called Akira, which is a known group. You can find stuff on them. They are associated with a well-known group called Conti ransomware group, but with ties to the Russian government. At this point in time, this is a public company. We stopped and did materiality assessment, and we determined it was not material. We looked at the impact on the company's operations, even though they had 6 servers down, that was not impacting their ability to operate. So no impact to revenue. This company had some safety systems. Those safety systems had not been touched, and so it was not a safety issue. Looked at the servers that had been encrypted and determined, no, we can come recover from backup on those systems. So we don't need to pay the ransom, at least not for the decryption key. And so the company starts shutting down the network to make sure they can go server by server and make sure they've cleaned each and every server that they can then restore. But they did have to delay their financial close, which was harmful in some ways, but not enough to make a material impact on the company. And with regard to sort of the financial response costs of mitigating an incident response, cyber insurance is there to cover those expenses, including the ransom. So the determination here was not material. So then the ransom negotiator began the negotiation. And this is literally, the bad guys give you a link. The link takes you to a chat site on the internet. So you're in a chat window with the bad guy on the internet, and it's very low tech. The bad guy here is in red. The ransomware negotiator is in black. And so the ransomware negotiator goes to that site, says, I'm here. Bad guy says, and this reads like a normal, like you're chatting with Amazon support here, but you've reached Akira support chat. Preparing the list of data we took. We want to settle this quickly. Are you the person who can negotiate with us? And then they send a link to a subset of the files that were taken, and they say, here's the files we took. You tell us which ones you'd like to see, and we'll show you those files so that we can prove to you we actually have your files and we're not faking that we have your files. And we will also tell us some that are encrypted, and we will show you how to decrypt 2 or 3 files to prove that we can decrypt your files as well. So this is sort of proof of life. They're establishing, hey, they can do with this. They have your data, and if you pay them, they can restore your data. Then they say, and they've been on your network, remember, they say, we've looked at your financial abilities, we've looked at your bank statements, we've looked at your cyber insurance limits. They're lying about all this, by the way. And based upon that, we're going to demand $1.62 million. Now, when I say they're lying about this, this was a publicly traded company with a market cap in excess of $500 million, with EBITDA in excess of $50 million. They had $40 million in the bank. And if you looked at a 10Q or a 10K, you would see all of that. In that instance, I don't think you asked for 1.6 million. So I don't think they had seen any of this. And I don't recall what the cyber insurance limit was, but it was at least 5 million, if not 10. So there was significant more resources, and they were faking that they knew what we had. But in any event, and they offer their suite of services. So decryption, evidence that they've removed the data from the dark web, essentially that they've deleted it in a way that they can't get access to it again. They'll tell us what vulnerabilities they found on our network and how they got in. And then they promise not to publish or sell our data. And they promise not to attack you in the future. And I said a second ago, you need a ransomware negotiator because you need to know whether you're acting with the good faith bad guy. This is what we're talking about. If they say they won't publish or sell your data, and they say they won't attack you again, can you take that bad guy at their word? And the determination was, yeah, this is a bad guy. We can take it their word on this. And then they again invoke cyber insurance here to cover it. They then begin a pressure campaign. And you can imagine this is not something where the ransom negotiator in real time is going to go back. This has got to go back to senior management. It's got to go back to the board. The board is making decisions about these sorts of things, and that just doesn't happen overnight. These conversations go back and forth on like once a day, but the bad guys want it to be faster, and so it's just a pressure campaign. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up! Stop wasting our time. We need an offer. We need an offer. The ransom negotiator understands this, and they know how to sort of slow this pace down. And you see him saying, "No news for you yet. Expect an update tomorrow. Thank you for waiting. I'll be in touch tomorrow." And then goes back and says, "We don't need decryption. We can restore without. What's your price without decryption?" So that now we almost cut it in half. We go from 1.6 down to 800, and then the pressure campaign starts again. Ransom negotiator knows how to do this conversation. That's more than we expected. We need more time. I've got to get the right approvals. And I think this was on Thursday. He says, "We'll give you an answer on Monday." That's when the bad guy says, "Keep in mind, if you're too slow, we're just going to start posting your data. And we're going to tell people that we've hacked you." And then you see the next response is the ransom negotiator saying what happened. What happened is the bad guy got impatient. And when the company who said they would respond on Monday, they got to sort of late afternoon on Monday and not responded. The bad guy posted on their blog that they had attacked this company. And so our negotiator sees that and says, "What happened?" And the bad guy says, "We told you we were going to do it. We did it. We'll take it down after you pay us." And this is another company. This is not the company we were dealing with here. This is just an example. But this is an example of what they do. They've got their blog, very low tech, and they post, "We've attacked this company. We've got their data." And then there are websites that then capture that and republish it. And that's what happened here to this company, Aluminum Steel, American Steel. Not my plan. So then the bad guy, the discussion changes a little bit. The bad guy says, "Look, I'll try to get them to take it down, but you haven't even made me an offer yet. You got to give me an offer." And the ransomware negotiator decides to use this publication to his benefit. And he says, "Part of what we were paying was for confidentiality. You've now made it public, so we can't pay you as much. We're not as much interested in paying you." And that works. And so the conversation continues. Again, the pressure campaign continues to point out that this was predicated on confidentiality, which we no longer have. And so that's when we get the bad guys. Now that we say you can't give us confidentiality anymore, so what's your new number? So the bad guy has now negotiated against themselves twice. Comes down to 500,000. They say they won't go any lower. They're lying about that. And the ransomware negotiator knows that they're lying about that. But he also knows that the pace needs to pick up here because we've seen them get impatient, and we need to respect that impatience. We offer the company offers $100,000. Full approval from the insurance company. This is the insurance company's money. And one thing I like about cyber insurance is that they don't haggle with you over here. They stand fully behind on these ransom payments. And it just goes back and forth. We say 100, they say 400, we say 160. They say 390. No, everything's final from that end. None of it's final. We come up to 2, and then we ultimately agree at 250. They immediately provide a Bitcoin wallet. Another thing this ransom negotiator provides is access to the Bitcoin. So you don't have to have the Bitcoin. The ransom negotiators got it, and you will just pay them in dollars and they'll get the Bitcoin for you. And then at the end, it's always good to confirm the agreement here. So the ransom negotiator confirms $250,000 for this suite of things. So evidence of data removal, which is important. They've taken your data. You need to have evidence that they no longer have your data. The security report, where they tell you how they got in, what vulnerabilities you have. The security reports I've seen in these circumstances are relatively useless, so you're not really getting value there. Guarantee not to publish your company name and guarantee not to sell your data. That's valuable here. That's really what the company was paying for, was that there were client names and pricing, and they didn't want that stuff out there. That they were paying to keep that information confidential. And then the guarantee not to attack in the future. And there's some value to that as well, right? Someone who has knowledge of the vulnerabilities in your network saying, we won't come back. And so there's value to that. And so that is how this whole ransomware process unfolded. And this was over the course of about 10 days. So that's the kind of thing that scares the heck out of me. It should scare the heck out of you and should sort of make you refocus on, all right, let's get a game plan in place to prevent this from happening to us or again. And it doesn't, again, the theme here is you don't have to be a technology guru to assess, are we moving in the right direction? Are we moving up and to the right? So the things you're talking to with your security team about, and then ultimately, having the same conversation with the audit committee and the board is, A, you got to start with the policies and procedures. Policies and procedures are not the key to your defense, but they are the start to your defense. Do we have an information security policy? Do we have a data retention policy which tells us how long we're going to keep stuff on our network and when we're going to take it off? And are we actually doing it? Do we have incident response plan that we have in places? If our network's down and you can't go find the document on the network, do you have a hard copy in your desk, and do you have a hard copy at your desk at home? Because it may be the weekend when you get this. And do you have the calling tree where you've got cell phone numbers and personal email addresses for everybody who needs to be involved in incident response, so that if your network's down, there's a communication plan? Are we tracking where we are? There are tools out there that will track the vulnerabilities on your network, really sort of software that hasn't been updated, things like that. And are you measuring as you're going through that and making improvements? Have we brought in the folks we need to do a risk assessment? Where is our key data? Where are our key servers? And what are we doing to protect them? What kind of security awareness? That's training, and it goes back to phishing. Your first line of defense on phishing is you got to train your users and you got to test your users. Cybersecurity testing, in addition to testing on phishing, you should be doing penetration tests where you hire people to come in and attack your network. The penetration tests I've seen are an external one where in their offices coming through the internet, they try and get into your network. An internal, you let them in the building and see what damage they can do if they're in your building. And then a social engineering where they start calling your help desk or they start calling your IT guys based on stuff that they see in LinkedIn and see if they can get the help desk to give them credentials over the phone. And if they fake being one of your executives, that's really interesting testing, because the help desk is in the customer service business. They want to be helpful. And so sometimes they give away more than they should. Again, and that's where multi-factor comes in. If you give even if the help desk gives the bad guy credentials over the phone, they can't give them that multi-factor, and so the bad guy won't be able to get in. And then the last part of your toolbook here, the security tools, and I'll spend some more time talking about that here in a second. So lots of security tools at your disposal. There's no one of these that's the key, and there's no sort of one size fits all here. This is really going to come down to the folks who understand your network the best and what protections your network needs. But these are the types of questions you should be asking as a non-technical person of the IT team and the information security team, and then reporting back up to the board and to the audit committee, right? So we need antivirus and endpoint detection tools. Those are the perimeter around your network that are blocking things and alerting on things. You need internally your network. Similarly, you need security tools that are looking for unusual activity inside the network. We talked about the email system and having sort of the phish reporting, and part of that phish reporting is when somebody reports a phish and it's a malicious phish, and the information security team realizes this isn't just one person who's received this, everybody in the company is receiving this. A phish tool will give them the ability to go in network-wide and just delete those phishing emails out from everybody's email box. That way, nobody can click on it, and that's an important tool. You need monitoring solutions, and I'll talk about that more in a second, that are watching all of your tools and going through the logs, and ideally using AI to assess those logs, because it's too much information for a human to look at, and sort of sorting that into critical, routine, and somewhere in between. Talked about internet security so that your users can't go to malicious websites or brand new websites that might be malicious. Zero trust is more of an attitude that, our defense strategy is going to be, we don't trust anything. And that's an attitude on your tools. That's an attitude on your employees, that they're not trusting any emails they get either. And then with regard to specific applications, you need to have security around that as well. So, what are some of the tools that you can maintain and deploy? And I talked about sort of the monitoring system. So, the key that you need here is what they call a SIEM, a security information and event management tool. And that is a tool that sits on top of all your other tools and aggregates those logs in and reads those logs and provides alerts. And those alerts are going to your security team, and the security team is responding to those and investigating based upon those logs. And ideally, you're using a sort of state-of-the-art one that's incorporating AI, because that's where AI is going to be harmful. It's going to be useful to bad guys, but it's also going to be useful to good guys because it's going to help cut through all of these logs that your system generates. You need an anti-malware system and inside your system that's looking for that malware and blocking it, so that when people click on things and the malware sort of comes in, your system immediately blocks it. And again, the 0 days might get through, but 99% of the time, that anti-malware system is going to block it, and then your event detection and response system is going to go to the information security team and say, hey, something's happening on this user's device. You need a vulnerability management tool, which can sit atop your network and look at your servers and your machines and your applications and tell you where those vulnerabilities are. And that's going to be based upon, are there updates that you haven't done? And it can keep metrics on that, where you can get charts and graphs and just sort of show you how many unmitigated vulnerabilities you have, how many of them there are known exploitations of that vulnerability, and therefore it's probably pretty critical that we fix that, or ones where no one's exploited this, and so it's not a day one priority. And so you, as an executive, can just sort of look at that reporting function and see, are we getting better each and every month? We talked about email phishing protection. Spam tools are important because they block out some of this phishing. Impersonation controls are important. And that, again, impersonation controls is a filter on your email and you have to tune it. So you have to tell it, look, here are the top, pick a number, 25, 50, 100 executives at our company. Here's the various ways you can misspell their name, right? So you put all the permutations in. If you see anything other than Jake Johnston at velaw.com for them, block it. And because you could be blocking someone's real Gmail account, block it and send it to me, the CISO, so that I can look at it real quickly and tell you, no, that's malicious, or no, that's actually our CFO's Gmail account. That's okay to let through, and that's okay to whitelist. But this prevents those things where someone impersonates one of your executives and convinces somebody to send a wire or write a check, not going through the normal processes. You need to have firewall technologies on the outside of your network protecting who can come in and what can be sent out. You need endpoint protection management, which blocks, we talked about least privilege, where you should only have the credentials that you need and nothing higher. And that also means you should only be able to access what you need to access on the system. And to when you leave the system, when you go to the internet, and particularly when you're sending data outside the internet, only go places that are approved. And that's key to sort of avoiding that thing where the bad guy can extract data if they get in. Identity and privilege management, another way of controlling what users can do and what they can't do, and what privileges they have and what they don't have. And there, least privilege is the key. Nobody needs to have any more privilege than they really absolutely need to have. And with regard to administrators, they should have a personal account that's not an administrator account. And then they've got the administrator account that they only use when they're doing administrator things. I've said this a couple times now, and I'll say it one more time just to hammer it home. Multi-factor authentication is just really, you have to have multi-factor authentication. That is your last line of defense. When all other things fail and they get those credentials, this is what keeps them out. A tough one is vendor management, because if you follow the news, what you see is a lot of these data breaches are not on the company's network. They're on a third party they work with. And so your data is only as protected as it is on your vendors' networks. And so you need to understand what vendors have access, either have access to our network or have our data on their network. And we need to make sure that their security, therefore, is as good as our security. And then the last thing that is both the first and the last line of defense here is going to be the training. Needs to be just part of the cadence of your company. And so, emails going out on a biweekly or a monthly basis with a security tip, 3 to 5 minutes at the beginning of employee meetings where you talk about the cybersecurity tip. Things, I just saw one earlier this week from our information security team about cybersecurity around the holidays, sort of some reminders about things you might, some scams you see around the holidays. And then you need sort of the more detailed, hour long, or maybe you break it up into 5 or 6 10-minute long snippets to keep people's attention that, hey, they can watch at their leisure on the web. But your employees are your weakest link, so the training has got to be there for the employees. And then as you think about things that are sort of these are technical, but not necessarily tools, right? So when you're assessing your network and assessing your security tools, there are standards out there for you to look at. ISO and NIST are the gold standards, and you can compare and have your IT team tell you how you compare against ISO and or NIST. You need to be doing internal audits of your policies. Do we have these policies? And more importantly, are we following these policies? And then you got to be hiring these consultants to test your vulnerabilities through penetration tests, both internal and external. That's kind of, in my mind, a once-a-year kind of thing. Should also be doing a tabletop exercise where you go through a mock incident and you get everybody around the table. And that's going to mean your executives, your security team, your legal team. And typically you would have a consultant run this for you. So the consultant runs you through an incident where sort of A happens. Okay, how do we deal with A? Now B happens, it's getting worse. Now C happens, it's even worse. And they just ratchet it up and the team works through it. And you think about, all right, do we have the right lines of communication? Do we have the right people in the room? Do we have the authorities we need to do these sorts of things? When do we need to get board approval? When do we need to get CEO approval? Practicing that on an annual basis is just going to be really valuable if something actually bad happens. And then on the right-hand side here, thinking about both from a incident response, how do we respond to that incident, but also based from a business continuity perspective, all right, if the network goes down, if our safety systems get impacted, how do we deal with that on a business operations perspective? There's the incident response, but there's also how do we get a business up and running? Identity management reviews, you need to be ideally occasionally assessing, do we have the right, things have changed. Does this user really need administrative credentials anymore? And if so, can we take them away? Do these people still work here? You need to be actively removing users from your network, as soon as they're no longer working for you. And then evaluating your vendors, and there are tools out there that will help you with that. And that's an area that's getting better and better on a monthly basis there. So last point I want to make, we talked about this earlier, is I'm a big fan of cyber insurance. In the first instance, the mere fact that a insurance company will underwrite you, I think, says a lot about the nature of your security. It means you're a risk they're willing to take. And I think that gives you a lot of, as a non-technical executive or board member, the fact that AIG is willing to put their money behind your network, I think is a great seal of approval. It's also great in that it gives you immediate access to a panel of experts. And so we talked about in that ransomware exercise, you call the carrier and the SWAT team just swoops down. You get your incident response consultants, and these are brand names, who are on a 2 or a 4 hour response. And even if it's a 2 or 4 hour response, they respond. Experience. You get breach counsel, which is not great for me because the client will call me and say, hey, we've had this, what do we do? And I say, call your carrier. I know that in 24 to 48 hours, the carrier is going to say, meet your new breach counsel, whose rate is half my rate. But there's value being added there, and I'm happy that the client gets what they need there. You get the cost covered, subject to deductible, all of these things. So the remediation of your network, the incident response, all of this stuff is being paid for by the carrier. You get ransomware coverage, and I'll come back to that in a second. When you get the limits on your policy, you think about if a bad guy saw our financials and was coming after us for a ransom, How much coverage do we need to cover that? And obviously, that's more important for public companies than private companies. If the data breach involves personal information, state law is going to say you have to go tell those people that their data has been compromised, and you probably have to provide them with some sort of credit monitoring service. The insurance will come in and actually provide the team to give those notices and to put that credit monitoring in place and pay for it. You get some level of business interruption. So if you're losing revenue because your business is down, there's some level of protection there. And then if it's the kind of thing that you get sued about afterwards, cyber insurance will step in and provide the defense of that lawsuit as well. Got a couple of questions here I want to run through. When you don't know who you're paying, do you seek a license from the government? Does the insurance company take care of that? What agencies provide the licenses? So the insurance company, the ransom negotiator you get will run the blacklist searches to make sure that the party they're paying is not on a banned list from the U.S. government. And that's key. They will do that. They know that if they associate that kind of payment, they could be liable. So they're going to make sure that the bad guy's not on any sort of blacklist. They'll confirm that for you. Insurance company is paying for that to be done. There's no licenses involved. You just you check the government list to make sure, hey, this is not somebody who's been banned. And then next question, what type of fitness test or audit will insurance company conduct prior to underwriting? It's a really long questionnaire. It's a real deep dive into your security, and then a series of Zoom calls with your information technology team and your information security team. Your information security team is going to be real sensitive about putting things related to cybersecurity in writing and sending them outside the building. And so insurance companies understand that. So they're willing to do a lot of this over Zoom, over the phone, to help protect the confidentiality. Okay, so with that, that's the program. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you for your time and attention today. Have a good day.